and thank you for joining us. I am John Mars, a member of the Home-Based Professional Learning Team with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And this video is going to go through the AIG functionalities in PowerSchool as of October 2020. I'm also joined today by two of my colleagues from the department. Tessa, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Tessa Hine, and I work with John on the Home-Based Professional Learning Team, and I'm excited to be here.
And also joining us today is Stephanie.
Hi, I am Stephanie Cyrus, and I'm the State Consultant for Gifted and Advanced Programming in the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education.
And I'll also point out that we do have a bit.ly on screen. You can use that to access the slide deck. It will remain available online. And so now I will turn it over to Stephanie to outline our objectives for this video.
Hi, so again, thank you so much for tuning in. Our goal here today is really just to walk through some of the basic functions within PowerSchool as it relates to gifted students and gifted programming. PowerSchool is the authoritative data source for gifted programming in our state. So over the years, as PowerSchool has changed, we've added some features and functionality. So we wanted to walk that through with our coordinators and other AIG staff, as well as data managers across the state and other school-based individuals who might be working with this data. So we wanted to update this for you so that everyone is familiar with the functions of PowerSchool. So you can see our goals here today. We're going to overview the access. We'll go through some processes for individual students. We'll look at running reports, some other helpful tips and tools, and then do a little troubleshooting. And so hopefully that will help make sure we're all on the same page. And so we want to begin by taking a look at AIG Access. In order to access an individual student's program information in a secure way, there are 3 distinct levels of access within PowerSchool. So you can see those 3 roles on the chart above. We have the AIG District Coordinator, the AIG Lead Specialist, and the AIG Specialist. And from my perspective, in terms of gifted programming, these roles do not necessarily relate to having specific AIG staff in your district that have these titles. This is really about thinking about the individuals in your district who have a need to access the student data and perform a variety of functions. And so you may not have lead specialists, so to speak, in your district, but you may have individuals who are school-based personnel who manage the data and need to be able to add or modify a student record. And so for those individuals, you will make sure that they have the role associated with the task that they need to be able to complete. And there's no expectation on our part as to how many people in your district might have a certain role. So you could have more than one AIG district coordinator or more than one person assigned that PowerSchool role. That is really up to an individual district. So we don't have any set ideas about how many individuals in your district fit into each of those categories. That's really going to be determined by the way you structure things in your district as to who has access to student records, who are the individuals inputting information, and how long should they have that access. So I'm going to turn it over to Tessa, who's going to talk a little bit more about these groups and roles and walk you through the process of setting up individuals in the system.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we do have linked on this slide. So if you navigated to the bit.ly that we provided at the beginning on this slide, you'll be able to access the slide deck, which has clickable links on it. And linked on this slide at the bottom is the setup steps for AIG Security QRD. And this QRD goes into more in depth into how to set up these roles in these security groups if they are not already set up. And it also goes more into depth about how to assign the roles and how to assign the security groups within your district or PSU. So on the next slide, we're going to show you how to assign the role within your district to someone who, for this slide, it shows someone who is a PS data manager. They might need the AIG district coordinator or AIG lead specialist or AIG specialist role, but they still need to be a PS data manager. And we go more into depth on that in the QRD. So if you have someone like that in your district that needs that role, but also needs a different security group, click on that setup steps for AIG security QRD linked on this slide and go check out that QRD, which is also available on the DPI website if you can't navigate to the slide deck. A lot of resources and QRDs are available on the DPI website. But to assign the role, you're going to want to choose the staff member by searching for them. And then once you pull them up, you'll have what you see on your screen now. And then you'll click on security settings and you'll click on the admin access and roles tab. And then you will get a screen like you see here. And where it says roles and schools, you'll click on the add button, which will pop up another screen that will allow you to add more roles to the person. The important thing to note here is that if they have a default group of PS data manager, they also need to have a role that is associated to that PS data manager group if you're going to assign them additional roles like the AIG security role. Again, this is all covered in the setup steps for AIG security QRD. It's a pretty in-depth QRD that walks you through all of that, so I would highly recommend that you visit that QRD for further information. And as always, you can submit a case to PowerSchool support if you need further assistance with that, and if you're just not seeing the screens that you feel like you need to see. Which brings me to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the AIG program screen that will have certain options on it based on your security roles that are assigned. As Stephanie was noting, for the AIG district coordinator, the AIG lead specialist, and the AIG specialist, there are different options for modifying, updating this screen. And it's all going to be based on your role that you have assigned to you, which is also in the setup steps for AIG security QRD, goes more into depth with that.
Mm-hmm. And Tessa, I think if I can just say for just a moment, what's really important from my perspective is that if you have someone who really just needs view-only access, that's that AIG specialist. They're only going to have view access. So this screen, for example, they wouldn't have an update button because that's not included in that role, right? Only your lead specialist and district coordinator are going to be able to add, modify, update specific student information. So, and the only difference between those two is how long of a window they're able to access that information. So the district coordinator can access student information basically forever, while the lead specialist has a finite window of time to update student records. And so if you think about security steps in that way, I think it's really helpful to see a screen like this. If you think you're supposed to be able to update a record and you don't have that button, you know, that's a clear sign that you have not been assigned the correct role. And we hear that question a lot. That's one of maybe the top 5 questions that we see coming across my desk for sure, and then likely the help desk as well. So
yes, and I'll add to that. It's super important that you create these roles and these security groups as written in the QRD. Like the names need to be exactly as written. This is due to the PowerSchool logic that is written in the code for these groups. So it looks specifically for those groups and those role names.
Mm-hmm. Cool beans. Thank you, Tessa. So now we're going to take a look at the individual student program information. So here, we're about to get into really the nuts and bolts, right? So in a nutshell, all gifted students must be identified within PowerSchool. So we're going to talk just quickly about how to identify a student, making sure that we create that initial record, and then how do we modify it when changes need to be made, and then how to enter data related to their identification evidence or the programming the student will receive. So we'll take a look at some of that functionality next. I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to help us with those individual processes.
Thank you, Stephanie. So for a newly identified student, this is really the simplest workflow you might have. You'll navigate to the student, you'll search for them and pull them up and open up their AIG program screen. And if you have the appropriate role, as we just discussed, you should have an add button for a student that has no previous AIG record. So you'll hit add. It's going to autofill the school name that you're currently in, that the student's currently enrolled in. Then you'll put in the school placement date, which is the date the student was placed at the particular school. And you will select their AIG identification code. And those labels and definitions should be outlined in your local AIG plan. So those would be the definitions you would use when selecting a code.
Absolutely.
And this is a before and after view for a newly identified student. So on the left, that is what their AIG program screen will look like prior to being identified. And on the right, that is what their screen would look like after being identified. And we do have linked down here at the bottom the AIG enrollment QRD, which goes through all of these steps in great detail.
Awesome.
So now we get into modifying a student. So once a student has been identified, there are a few different scenarios in which you might modify that record. So if you, for some reason, need to add a new record, for example, if their identification code changed or something like that, you would hit the update button as shown in that first screenshot on the far left. And then that will open up these 4 additional buttons, and we're only going to talk about the first 2 at the moment. So the Add New Record button will allow you to add another AIG entry on this screen. However, you cannot add another AIG record for a student until you withdraw the previous record. A student can only have 1 active AIG record at a time. And we'll talk about withdrawing here in just a moment. On the other hand, if you are editing the latest record, and now keep in mind your district coordinator can edit these at any time, your lead specialist can only edit them within 30 days of when they're saved. But when you hit edit latest record, it is going to just make those placement date field and the AIG identification code field editable, so you can update those and then hit submit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as far as withdrawing, so you will very rarely withdraw a student. It's always recommended to serve students as much as possible. However, if a student has been newly identified in an additional area and you need to update their AIG code, that would be a situation where you would withdraw them and then add a new record. So when you withdraw a student, same process as we just saw, you'll go to their AIG program screen, you'll hit update, and this time you would hit the 3rd button, withdraw. And that is going to pop up on the latest record, will allow you to populate the withdrawal date, and you can select the withdrawal code. So for example, if a student was being newly identified in a different area with a different code, you would choose that 3rd withdrawal code for updated identification status.
Mm-hmm. And John, I'm just going to reiterate here, if you don't mind, that because AIG identification is not consistent across the state, right? AIG identification is determined locally by each LEA. So we strongly, or now PSU, we strongly encourage districts to honor the identification from other school districts and charter schools with an official program. When that criteria doesn't align to your local criteria, we strongly encourage districts and charters to consider the student needs and how those needs might best be met within your local programming options. So we strongly discourage the practice of what we call de-gifting students. However, there are also times that parents request that their children be removed from programming. And so as a state, we have to provide those options. But as John said, it should be very rare that a student is withdrawn from gifted programming. But we do have these 3 codes. We know that this third code is now available. This is a new option for us. What we found was that adding multiple records without ending the record before was causing issues for students to be counted in our reporting modules more than once, and we have to be able to guarantee an unduplicated count. So we had to put this new process in place to ensure that our data is accurate. And so if you do have any questions about that flow, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to walk you through those steps or the rationale or the reasoning as you need to. But just want to reiterate how important it is for us to really consider student needs and continuing services even through the transfer process. So thank you.
Thank you. And so that brings us now to deleting a record. So if an AIG record is less than 30 days old, there will be a delete option available. So just like before, you'll hit update, and then if the record is less than 30 days old, you will see a little minus button on that record's line in the last column there. And you can hit that little minus button to delete the record. And again, the delete button will only appear for those users who have an appropriate role for records that are less than 30 days old.
Right, and John, we usually just kind of distinguish. The only time you would delete a record is if someone just chose the wrong student to begin with. If there's just a complete error, this child was never supposed to be identified, just the wrong, you in the initial process, you selected the wrong student. That's when you would use delete if that record should never have been created. That's a very different mindset than editing the record, which John walked through already. So editing a record is just, there's something that we've made a simple mistake, but the student is indeed being served in our gifted program. So just kind of think about those things separately. Editing has its own unique purpose, and deleting does as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we also kind of wanted to take a moment to kind of discuss what you might expect on this AIG program screen in the current status tab. So in this screenshot example you can see the student's AIG history. So their previous AIG identification records were transferred in from another PSU, in this case, a local charter school, through the statewide transfer student record process. Please do reach out to your data manager or your PowerSchool coordinator if you are expecting to see transfer data for a student here and it's not there. There are a few different scenarios where your PowerSchool person may still be in progress with that transfer process. And we also want to point out that students who are identified as AIG at a charter school, you may see double records for them like you do here. So the bottommost record is from Evergreen Community Charter. Above that is from Evergreen Community Charter's DPI FTE school. And that's nothing to worry about. That's just sort of a side effect of the way that whole process works at a charter school. And also keep in mind that AIG plans are optional for charter schools. So we only have, I think, approximately 20 charter schools right now with current AIG programs. And also mention, as students transition from like middle to high school or during the PowerSchool end of year process, it's going to create a new record for them at their new school. So you can kind of see here as they've progressed along at each school they've gone to, they have a record. And we also have linked here at the bottom a QRD on the student transfer process. So if you are interested in more information on how that works, you can definitely check out that QRD.
Right. And John, it just occurred to me to mention to you all, if you can see underneath the title page where it says AIG program, there's an initial identification date, and that date remains fixed, right? You notice that that date matches the initial date of this student's being identified as gifted. And so the school placement date is nice. It allows you to see when a student made a transition to another school or maybe began receiving different services. And so it's a nice historical marker and record. So you see that initial identification date that is developed or created as soon as that initial record is created, and that date remains fixed. But the school placement date will change as a student moves along in their journey, right? As they move from elementary to middle to high, or if they transfer. So it's nice to see that, and it's nice to be able to see this screenshot of what you should see for a student who is currently identified, their current status. You can see their historical picture as well as where they are right now and how they're identified and what services they might be receiving. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. So that brings us to the next two tabs that you may see there on the screenshot. So there is a tab for identification evidence, and I do want to note that this tab and the next tab, program services, we're going to talk about, are both completely optional. They are kind of just there for your use as you see fit.
Absolutely. So this feature is available, this identification evidence. This aligns nicely with our North Carolina AIG program standards, right? So standard 1F or practice F is all about documenting the identification evidence. And so districts and charters with an official program are required to document identification evidence for use to identify a student. And so you can utilize this tab to put the information that you've used to identify the student into the PowerSchool system. And one advantage for students is that when you use this tab, the data is easily accessed by their new LEA or new charter if they transferred. So it's pretty easily accessible. It's right there, and you can determine how you would serve that student in your district based on that identification evidence. Now, currently there's not a way to batch upload data from universal screeners. So if you use like the COGAT or the Naglieri or some other universal screener, there's not a way to batch upload that information. However, you can utilize any or all of the fields that you need to document that identification process. And I think John is going to show you how to do that.
Absolutely. So just like before, you're going to search for your student and navigate to their AIG program screen. And this time at the top, you'll be on the Identification Evidence tab. And if you have the appropriate role, you will have that button on the right that says Provide Identification Evidence. And when you click that, it's going to pop up this screen that will allow you to enter all of the information that you would like to enter. I'll point out the only required field on this screen is the start date. So everything else you see listed there can be used at your discretion, whatever fits your local AIG plan the best, and whatever best describes that student's identification.
Absolutely.
So once you fill that in and hit submit, it will take you back out. And so this is what that tab looks like with a saved record. If you needed to edit the record, you could click on the start date of that record to edit any of that information. And there's also a run report button over there, which gives you this really nice sort of pre-formatted letter almost that explains what the identification evidence is. And we'll take a look at that report real briefly in just a few more slides, I believe. So next up, our other optional tab is this Program Services tab. So very similar to the last one, this one allows you optionally to record the program services that are being provided to the student and run a report very similar to the identification evidence report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and John, this one also aligns closely with our North Carolina AIG program standards, Standard 3 Practice I, which is all about documentation of the plan being provided for the student. And so generally we call those differentiated education plans, or DEPs. And districts, a lot of districts have now begun to use this tool to develop a DEP so that it's already in PowerSchool. And again, for students who may transfer or are highly transient, you can already see the kinds of services that they're receiving. And in terms of the headers, we selected, when we designed this tab, we selected those services that were most frequently offered across our state. So most districts have something that aligns with these headings, and then there are areas where you can describe more fully what that option might look like in your district, and there's an other program services as well. And so John is going to walk you through creating those plans.
Thank you. Yes. So very similar to the last tab over there on the right. Once you have navigated here, you will have a button to create a new plan. Again, if you have the appropriate roles. And when you hit that, it will pop up this screen for your new program service record. And so again, just like last time, the only thing you have to fill in here is the start date. All of these other options can be used at your discretion. And I'll also mention that when you check one of those sort of categories listed there, it also gives you a notes field next to that so you can kind of describe it a little bit better. And once you've got that all filled in, you can click submit. And just like on the previous module, it will be added to the list of program services. If you need to edit it, you can click on that start date and modify it. And just like on identification evidence, there is that run report button. So you can hit that to run an individual student report that explains their program services. And Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some PSUs even are using that report as like a rudimentary DEP for their students, or maybe like a starting point at least.
That's right. That's right. We're seeing that more and more often, especially now that we're shifting there's been a lot of attention to this being paid lately because of our remote learning situation. And so lots of folks are turning to this electronic DEP that's already there. But you'll see in the report field that it also, when you print out the report, you'll see spaces for signatures. And so it can be used, especially if you don't want to redesign paperwork every other year. This is an option. As plans change, sometimes people change forms, but this is an option for you to use that would keep it just clean and simple, and it's easily accessible by various AIG program staff. So
Awesome.
So actually, John, I think we're going to begin to look at reports next. And again, I'm just going to remind you that PowerSchool is the authoritative data source, so it's really important for us to be careful about what we enter and to be accurate. And so all of the accountability reports that include information about the performance and achievement of AIG students, all of your EVOS reports, any federal reports that look at gifted students, they utilize the data that's in PowerSchool. So I cannot stress to you enough that accuracy of the headcount data is really critical. And I know that John is going to walk you through how to run a head count, but I want to just stress to you that we collect that data twice a year. We collect it in the fall, and we collect it in the spring. And our submission window is open for a 2-week period of time. It's November 15th through November 30th. And at the end of that window, we will pull the data that we need to share with stakeholders. And in spring, it's April 15th through 30th. And again, the deadline of April 30th, what that means is that data has to be clean and accurate and ready to be pulled. And I just will say one caveat. The question we get most often is, in order to be included in the head count, when does a student need to be receiving services? And just really quickly, a student must have been receiving services on or before the first day of that submission window. So November 15th and April 15th. So I get this question a lot. I have a student who started being served on November 20th. They're not on my head count. They're not going to be. They will not appear on your fall head count unless they have been receiving services on or before November 15th. Anytime after that, they're going to show up on your April head count. So in April 2021, they'll begin showing up. But I just wanted to share that quick caveat because that's like another of the most frequently asked questions that we receive in our office. So I'm going to turn it back over to John so you can delve into how do you get to the head count reports and other reports that are available for your use.
Thank you. So yes, we will start off with both the fall and spring head count. They are both accessed in the same place and they really work exactly the same way. The only difference is going to be your submission start date and your submission end date. And I also want to note here that the submission start date simply controls when you can actually submit this report. You can run either of these reports at any time throughout the school year as you're entering your AIG data. You just won't be able to actually approve it until that first date has passed, and you definitely want to make sure it's approved by the due dates. So to get here, and you can do this at either the school or the LEA office level in PowerSchool, but over on the left side under the reports heading, you are going to hit state reports, and that will bring you to the state reporting dashboard. And your list of current collections, like shown here, may look a little different. Things may be reorganized. You may have more things listed here or fewer things listed here. But somewhere in that list, you should find the fall AIG headcount and the spring AIG headcount. And next to those entries, you'll have the submission start and end dates. And then you'll have a column that shows you how many errors or warnings you might have, which we'll get into in a moment. And then you have your workflow options buttons. So in this screenshot, you can see that there's just a run button. So you do have to hit run to actually run the report. And once you hit run, you'll notice up at the top right of the screen is a refresh button. So you'll hit run, and then you can hit refresh until the report shows up as complete. And you'll know the report is showing up as complete because a review button will appear next to the run button for that report. So then you can hit review to review the data. If you look at your data and you realize that some corrections are necessary, you can go back and follow some of those individual student processes we just talked about to correct your data. And then you're going to need to actually come in here and hit run on this report again. You do have to run the report again to get your updated, corrected data. And once you have reviewed the report and everything looks correct, you will be able to approve. So that's another workflow option button that will appear. If you run your report and it completes with no errors, fatal errors, you will also have an approve button there. But I will mention it's very important that you review your report and verify the accuracy before you hit the approve button. And I'll also mention for a district, you will need to run and approve these reports at the school level and then also at the PSU or LEA office level. And like Stephanie mentioned, please do note that these are a hard deadline. So whatever is on your report on after the due date is what DPI will be pulling. So just definitely keep that in mind. It's very important, as she mentioned, to run these reports and make sure that they are as accurate as they possibly can be. So I do want to take you through the review tab. So once you have run either one of these reports, they both look the same. and you hit the review button, you're going to land on this kind of strange screen. So at the top, the first two things you'll have to do is choose your category and choose a data view using the drop downs. So the category you'll select is going to be AIG Fall Views. And then underneath that, that will determine what data views you can see. So the Fall Views category is going to show you all of the data that is on the report. And you can see here that the data views differ a little bit between the LEA office level on the left and the school level on the right. So at the district or LEA office level, you're going to get sort of overall numbers as well as the individual school numbers. And I'll also mention that the other category you may see is exceptions. So when you select the AIG exceptions category, your data view options are going to be one of these three exceptions. And so for the AIG report, none of these exceptions are actually fatal errors. None of these will stop you from actually submitting the report. But they are things that you want to take a look at and correct if it's possible in time for the report. And once you select these data views, you will see a list of students who have these issues so that you can go and correct that information. And again, just keep in mind that needs to be corrected before those due dates because DPI is going to pull whatever is in there. So that covers us for the headcount reports. We also wanted to take some time to talk about some standalone reports that we have available for your local use as necessary. And again, these can be found at both the LEA office level and the school level in PowerSchool. So over on the left side of PowerSchool, this time you would hit standalone reports, and that is going to take you straight to the state standalone reports tab. And you'll notice the first 5 North Carolina state reports listed on this tab are all AIG reports. So the AIG identification evidence summary is going to give you a PDF for each selected student of their identification evidences with the space for the parent and school team member signatures. This is one of those reports that we talked about earlier and that we will actually look at on the next slide. The next one, the AIG latest record from another LEA or school, is going to give you a spreadsheet of all students whose current AIG record came from a different PSU. So this one could be very useful when you've got kids transferring in and you want to see what kind of AIG identifications they're coming with. The AIG Program Services Plan. So this is another one that we talked about in the last section. So this is the PDF summary of the student program services plans. And this is the one that could be used as sort of a basic DEP or maybe a starting point for one. And this does, like Stephanie mentioned earlier, have space for parent and school team member signatures. And again, we're going to look at that one on the next slide as well. Next one down, we have the AIG Transfer Status ID evidence. So this is going to be another spreadsheet of all the students with identification evidence records that have transferred in from another PSU. So the last spreadsheet we talked about is all students who have been identified AIG at all at another PSU. This one is all students who have identification evidence that transferred in. And the next one down, very similar, is going to be a spreadsheet of program services that have transferred in. So some very useful reports. Now, when you click one of these report titles, it's going to give you a couple of options and allow you to go ahead and run the report. And when you run that report, it's going to take you over here. The screenshot on the right is the report queue. And so you can see there's sort of 2 sections to this page. There are queued reports, so reports that are about to be run or that are currently running. And then below that, you'll have your list of completed reports. And so just like with the state reporting we looked at, you'll hit that refresh button at the top right of the screen. until the report that you're running jumps down to the completed section. And once it does that, you can click the completed word on the status column to download that file, whether it be a PDF or a spreadsheet.
Right.
And so once you hit that completed word, here are 2 sample reports of the AIG Identification Evidence Summary and the Program Services Plan, the one you could use as a DEP there on the right. And so you can see this is just very simply going to sort of print out all the information that you've put in there. It has spaces for parent guardian signatures. It has spaces for school team member signatures. And you can see it even allows you the opportunity to type in the names of the school team members if you like. So in these examples, I've entered my own name as a school team member on these reports.
Cool.
And so I would like to turn it over to Tessa now to take us through the next couple of reporting options.
Yes, thank you. So there are a few different options you can use to search for and find identified AIG students within your instance. The one that we're viewing now is the AIG student listing report that you can use. It's under the North Carolina Special Functions in PowerSchool. So from the start page, on the left-hand side under the Functions menu, you'll click on Special Functions, which will then take you to the Special Functions menu. And down under the North Carolina Special Functions, you can click on the Fall AIG Student Listing or the Spring AIG Student Listing, depending on which head count of students you're looking for, the current head count. And this will provide you with a list of currently identified students for that head count. And then there is another option on the next screen if you want to navigate to that, John. There's another option you can use, which is to use the field identifier. So you would use the field name and then the AIG identifier to search for students who are identified, currently identified with that status. So the field is S_AIG_STU_AIG_X.AIG_status. And so the # or the hashtag is going to give all students that are currently identified as AIG. It's going to give you a list of those. And it's either going to be, you're either going to use the # or you're going to use the equal sign. So there are 6 different options you can choose to search from. And all of this is actually covered in the AIG Search Functionality QRD, which is also linked on this slide. It goes into much more detail about what is returned with this and what the field identifiers are that you can use to search. So you can either manually type in the search field in the student search field that is highlighted on this screen. So you can manually type in the field name that I just provided, or you can actually click on the view field list over to the far right of what is highlighted and then just type in AIG, and that will pull up the field name, and then you can click on that field name and it'll automatically paste it in the field for you, and then you can do your search based off of that. And again, like I said, the AIG Search Functionality QRD that is linked on here has much more detail about all of the searches that you can do to pull up the students that are currently identified.
So Tessa, if I can just add from a programming perspective, one of the benefits of the student search functionality is really, or one of the things I hear coordinators say most often is that you can really drill down. So for example, if I wanted or needed for some reason to just see those students who were IG or the intellectually gifted students in my school, I could use that search function and get just that kind of pared down list, kind of the filtered view, if you will. And so some folks find that to be helpful, whether that's passing that information along to the regular classroom teachers, whether that's in planning small groups, how can I pull just these students, all kinds of different things you can do. But one of the benefits of a student search versus the current student listing or the full head count and all those things is that you're able to drill down and focus, and you can store those reports. And one of the things that's nice in the search functionality QRD that Tessa was working on was put together for you is you've got the instructions for how to store those and save those searches so that you have those for future reference. So it's one of the benefits of going through this process as opposed to a different, gathering the information differently.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the next screen is going to go into the at-risk dashboard. The at-risk report can identify students who are at risk due to low grades or poor attendance. And additionally, this screen can be easily filtered to show only AIG students who may be at risk. So the dashboard is from the start page. It's on the functions menu on the left. If you click on dashboard, it'll pop up the dashboard screen and you can click on at risk. And then at the top, it has the at-risk student counts. It says high, moderate, and some. And from there, you can click on either of those to then populate a list below of students who are at that level of risk. And Stephanie, do you have anything to add with that? Or John?
I think that I would just say that districts have found this to be super helpful. As you know, one of the North Carolina AIG program standards, Standard 6, is all about program accountability. And as we think about different kinds of data, some people have found this to be a helpful report, especially for high school students that might be at risk of dropping out or just drilling down and finding out information about how students are performing, and are there some indicators that there's students who need some additional support. Right? People don't really like to think about AIG students and dropout, but that does happen. Over the last several years, we're trending at about somewhere between 290 and 340 AIG dropouts a year. And so that, every district might have somewhere between 1 and 3. So or more or less, depending on your size. And so some folks have found this to be really helpful. And I think it's worth taking a look at. So wanted to make sure we included that for you all.
Yes,
and I want to point out too real fast that if you look at the filter section of this screenshot, there is that checkbox to use the current selection. So that is where you get into the power of that search feature Tessa was talking about. You can search for the AIG students you want to look at, whether that's all of them or maybe the students with a particular code. And then you can apply that as a filter on the at-risk student dashboard. So by checking that box, you're going to only see the at-risk students that resulted from that.
Yes, thank you, John.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think we're going to take a look at some additional items that might be helpful to you in your role as a coordinator or data manager supporting gifted students. So we're going to look at some of those other helpful tips or just things to look for. And so one of the first things is that we have an AIG alert button. You likely have seen that on the screenshot. It's a small grayish circle with some blue lettering that just says AIG, and so that's super helpful. It is visible to teachers in their teacher backpack, but that AIG alert feature helps us to know who are the gifted learners and how do we need to begin to serve them. Now, a teacher will have access to drill down and see their identification area and all of those things, but it will at least get them thinking, and will get the conversations started about how to support the gifted learners in their classroom. And I would say also that the student has to be currently enrolled in AIG programming. So if a student has been withdrawn for some reason, that alert button will no longer be visible. But so long as they have a current open record, so to speak, they will have that feature. We can export student information, download that into a CSV or into an Excel spreadsheet, and that's always helpful to be able to sort and then use that information as you need. We can also generate, I know this was a highlight in my previous district. This was super helpful to have this feature to be able to generate mailing labels. So if we have a function that's coming up and we want to invite all parents, you can go to search and group functions and print those mailing labels. So that's, super helpful to be able to do. But we certainly, in my former district, used that in targeted communication. And then again, those other reports that are generated for AIG students, then we've kind of walked through some of those reports. So we've got some really great features in PowerSchool now that will help us in terms of our programming efforts. So beyond just identifying students so that they're included on our reporting efforts, as we're doing some programming, it's helpful to have some of these other features to ensure that we're thinking about the needs of gifted learners and what our next steps should be in communicating and then in serving. So those are available to you at this time.
And I do want to add that all of these links on here are clickable that navigate you to QRDs or further information on what's listed on the screen.
That's right. So thank you guys for making sure that they have the access to those documents. That's super helpful. And I think as we kind of begin to wind down, we want to look at some troubleshooting and what to do when you're experiencing some trouble. So I'm going to turn it over to John and Tessa to help us with the troubleshooting component.
Absolutely. Thank you. So when it comes to troubleshooting, really anything in PowerSchool, but AIG information included or the AIG module, anytime that you have a question or a concern with the functionality of these modules or the use of them or the data that is coming out of them, definitely submit a ticket to PowerSchool. Now, keep in mind that you do have to have your district or charter school PowerSchool coordinator submit that ticket, but you'll want to get with them and make sure that you report, especially anything that is an issue or a data problem that you are unable to fix. You definitely want to report that to PowerSchool as soon as possible. And we have it in the speaker notes of this slide deck, but to do that, your coordinator would go to help.powerschool.com. Or there's also a dedicated North Carolina PowerSchool support line at 1-855-339-4790. Outside of that, when should you contact NCDPI? So PowerSchool support will reach out to NCDPI if they need additional clarification for any ticket that comes in. In addition to that, if you just have like a smaller sort of process question or real basic question, you can also always feel free to email Stephanie directly with any data type of question or compliance question maybe.
That's right. And I often tell coordinators, if you have submitted a ticket to PowerSchool already, you get a confirmation that that ticket has been received. If you share that with me, if you forward it to me, then I can work closely with the help desk when they get it to kind of think through what our next steps are. So, I mean, I don't help them with the technical side, but often I hear from the help desk in terms of programming and what should be functioning and how should it function. And so I try to help you as much as I can troubleshoot kind of on the backside. So if you do submit tickets to PowerSchool, feel free to bring me into the loop because I do stay in pretty close contact with our internal PowerSchool team as well as some folks from PowerSchool as well. So just keep us posted and know that we're happy to try to help in any way that we can.
Yeah, and I'll state that it's very important that whenever you identify an issue that you go ahead and submit a ticket to PowerSchool, because as Stephanie said earlier, the deadlines are hard deadlines, and it's unlikely that your report will be unlocked unless you have a ticket into PowerSchool that is currently being worked on.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think that we are at the end of our time together. I hope that this has been super helpful for you. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Tessa and John, who've done an amazing job helping pull together this information, updating all of the outdated materials so that you have the most recent and up-to-date information possible. So I wanted to thank them individually. They've just done an amazing job, and just know that if I can help you with the programming aspect, I'm happy to do so. Just please let me know. And I'll turn it back over to Tessa and John.
Absolutely. I'll just thank everyone again for joining us for this video. We know your time is valuable, and so we greatly appreciate that you have chosen to spend it watching our information.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Again, your first point of contact is always going to be PowerSchool, but however, on this slide deck is linked our emails if you need to reach out to any of us.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.